So welcome everybody. Happy New Year. Oh, happy Hogmanay if you're north of the border. Hope you've all had a healthy and restful Christmas. And that we feel for the ones up in the north of Scotland. You can see these snow showers continuing to come through. So our thoughts are with you. Hope you're keeping safe and stock is getting fed. So always a challenging time of year into January, February. And probably quite an opportune time to talk about feeding sheep, feeding the ewe. And that's the topic of our first winter webinar. So we've got 5 of these, the first one this evening, and then we'll be having one every fortnight from today onwards. The first one, glad to welcome Dewi Jones, who's on the screen there. Rhidian, a consultant now for 10 years up in Northumberland, and I know Rhidian for many, many years when he was the farm manager director in Syrup, and a long distinguished career, but a very applied and practical career as well, taking science into practice. So it's always a joy to have Rhidian involved in anything that we do, really, because he'll give you the snippets that make the difference to you at farm level. And then we have Hamish, our own Hamish MacDonald, farm manager up in Southfield. And Hamish really is putting the theory into practice, as you'll see shortly, in how we run a Nucleus farm up in Pike. So enough for me wittering on. There will be at the bottom of your screens, you'll see that there is an ability to put Q&As in there. So please, if you want to ask any questions, please put them in there and we will endeavour to answer them. I'll probably ask the presenters to do their sessions first, and then we'll ask their questions at the end of each individual session. But there'll be plenty of time for questions, and we'll make sure that we try and answer as many as possible. And we are recording this, so we've got another 100 odd people that are registered that aren't on currently. So a recording will come back to everybody tomorrow, whether you're listening tonight or whether people haven't made it. There will be a recording going out to everybody tomorrow. So enough from me. Rhidian, we're going to pass over to you, please, to share a bit of your wisdom and your experience of feeding these ewes this time of the year.
Thanks, Dewi Jones. I'm just going to find my presentation and share it with you. And let's get this slideshow. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes, we're up again. Oh,
Great, good. Well, thank you very much, Dewi, for that kind introduction. A long and distinguished career could be read as a bit over the hill, but I'll take it, Dewi. Thanks very much. What I'm going to cover is some more theoretical issues with feeding sheep this winter, focusing mainly on the sort of outdoor systems, because that's what I think most of the audience here will be interested in. I know Hamish has got a very interesting story to say later on because of what they do at Southfield, which is a good sort of hybrid of different sort of wintering systems that they do, including very accurate feed budgeting and updating things as you go through the winter. Because obviously, when you get a spell of weather like we have at the moment, that can often mean that you've got a bit less dry matter at the end of a spell of weather like this than you had at the beginning. So it's important to keep these things updated. Just a brief outline of what I'm going to cover, just the basics really, body condition scoring, nutritional requirements. We look at feed budgeting just in a very sort of practical sense. We're not going to do any sort of detailed calculations as such. Look at the sort of wintering options that people are adopting these days. But we'll hear more from Hamish, because he's obviously putting it all into practice. And then something that's a good sort of focus of my attention for probably the last 10, 12 years is winter grassland management. I was involved with a project with SAC and John Vipond on grass wintering with Eblex, as it was. That started, I think, in 2012. And that's sort of been a game changer for lots of people. And then finally, a sort of a fairly practical way of feeding forage more efficiently with less waste. So first of all, I mean, there's quite a lot of resources out there on the sort of subjects I'm going to be talking about. And in particular, managing body condition, that's really what it's all about for sheep in winter. You want to, if you keep their condition score right, then everything else tends to fall into place, largely fall into place. And like I said, there's a few resources out there. If you Google some of these things, QMS, this has been on the go now for I think for about 12 years. Trevor Cook from New Zealand did that nutrition and body condition scoring timeline for them. Still a good sort of resource. Like I said, if you Google it, I found it online this morning, so it's fairly easy to find. And then AHDB obviously have got quite a lot of resources. The book there, that's I think that's the most recent one that Neris did, Managing Breeding Ewes. It's got a good section on nutrition and condition scoring and lots of other things as well. So there's lots of information out there for a more sort of in-depth read about these things. So really condition scoring, as far as I'm concerned, really, it's not just something you do once or twice a year. It's something you have to really focus on all year round. And those are some of the targets as outlined in that HDV book. Probably the most important thing, obviously, is that you get them in the right condition for tupping in the autumn, because you start them off right, and then everything else tends to follow. Weaning is probably the time when it might be variable depending on the age of the ewe, how much grass you've had, how many lambs she's reared, all these sort of things. But then you've generally got a fair bit of time to let them recover from the weaning condition score to tupping. So if they've got a condition score to gain, then we have this rule of thumb that a month on good grass gives you half a condition score of recovery. So you should have plenty of time for that. And now focusing at this time of year, obviously, you're now moving towards scanning time in the next few weeks or a month or so, depending on when you lamb. And really, it's still keeping an eye on them, making sure that they're okay, and then at that scanning, that's another opportunity to get your hand on them and see that they're okay. And I think we recognize these days that it's better to get your ewes in the correct body condition and maintain them than fluctuate between extremes. As try and avoid that if you can. We don't tend to flush ewes anymore like we used to in the past. And we know that it's far more efficient for a sheep to maintain condition rather than to put it on, and roughly takes about 4 times the energy to put on a kilo of condition than you actually get in terms of energy released by that kilogram. So it's more efficient to maintain condition if you can. And as far as I'm concerned, these targets that are not really, shouldn't be an average for your flock. They should be every sheep in the flock should be over these targets or at these targets, because that gives you the best chance of getting good results. And I think the farmers that I know that have got really good attention to detail on condition score management tend to get good results consistently. So that's an important message. So I'm not going to read through this table because this is just a table, really. You can read this at your leisure tomorrow or whenever. That energy requirements of 70 kilogram ewes, and it's sort of extrapolated from the HDB Feeding the Ewe booklet, which has been out for 7 or 8 years now, I think. And the most important thing to realize, I suppose, is that from maintenance of about 9.5 megajoules, it's double that, when by the time she's lambing, if she's carrying twins. And so, so that's it's a big increase from maintenance to pre-lambing. And then obviously into lactation, which is not for tonight, I suppose, then it sort of almost doubles again. So that's, there's a massive increase in demand there from maintenance to the point of lambing, and then again lactation. And this is all, if you're doing it largely from grass, it's got to be really high quality grass. And then when it comes to protein is a bit more complicated, but the metabolizable protein system is outlined in the Feeding the Ewe booklet, which is it's a good reference material. And it's a bit heavy going in places, but it's good reference material. And again, as the ewe gets closer to lambing, especially if she's carrying twins or triplets, then the protein needs to be pretty good, in terms of providing that. And again, the critical periods, I mean, this is stuff you probably already know, that the 10 days pre-tupping and post-tupping, really vital period for conception and so on. The diet must be really good in this period. I know lots of farmers now adopt this sort of moving the sheep almost daily during this pre-tupping period, just to give them that extra nutrition. They're not bothered about cleaning down to residuals at that time. They just want to move them onto good covers of grass and keep that good nutrition going for that period. And again, post-tupping, that's when obviously embryos are getting implanted and so on, and everything getting settled down. So you need to avoid any sort of sudden changes in diet, handling, movement, transport, all these sort of things. And again, if there's bad weather, supplement if you have to. And I know these days we don't, people like to do things from grass, don't want to feed too much, but at the end of the day, it's all about the nutrition of the sheep. That's the most important thing. And at the moment, feed is relatively inexpensive compared to previous years. So if you have to supplement, then don't be afraid to. And then obviously, as the pregnancy continues, that in that sort of middle sort of trimester, if you like, then again, that's a lot of placentas developing, and so I guess it's a very they're all important periods in pregnancy, I suppose. And then the last third of pregnancy, then again, maintaining that condition scoring, make sure that the diet's appropriate. This is when you'll have the singles and twins and so on segregated, so you can actually make some economies perhaps on some fit singles and feed that to sort of leaner twins or whatever that's appropriate. So this is all stuff that you probably know, but it's sometimes worth having a bit of a refresher. So like I said, we'll go back to that for a minute. So yeah, managing condition score is probably the most important thing that you do as a sheep farmer. So getting acquainted with how to do it, giving them the right score, all these sort of things, very important. Important to be consistent. It's not important that you're absolutely exactly right, as long as you're consistent in your mind as to what condition the sheep are in. And there's been a lot of work done in the last 10 years or so with HDB's Challenge Sheep Project. Neris did a lot of work in that. That you can probably find some stuff on that as well. And the importance of body condition scoring and managing it is really, really important. Okay, so feed budgeting, and I think we'll hear perhaps from Hamish later on about this in terms of what he does at Southfield. It really boils down to supply and demand, like a lot of things. So you need to measure your forage stocks if you've got bale silage or even clamp silage. Count your bales, weigh them, analyze them for things like dry matter. Just simple things like dry matter, ME, and protein. That's the basics that you need to know. Dry matter is probably one of the most important things, because if you've got a wet bale and a dry bale that weigh the same, then you're going to have a lot more dry matter in the dry bale. That stands to reasons, so that's really important thing to get right. If you're allocating feed budgeting for grass or forage crops, then again it's the same thing exactly, except it's just a crop that's growing in the ground. So for grass, you can use a sward stick or a plate meter. I like a plate meter myself. I know everybody hasn't got one, but a plate meter gives you probably more consistent reading over the whole field. It takes a bit of time to do, but it's usually worth it, because this is the nutrition of your sheep for the next few months that you're talking about. If you've got forage crops, fodder beet, that sort of thing, then you can cut and weigh quadrats in the case of forage crops, or you can do a certain calculation based on the width of the rows in fodder beet. And again, get an idea of what you've got growing in the field, so you can allocate it accordingly. And it's better to know, even if you haven't got as much as you hoped, it's better to know that than not know it. And then when it comes to an analysis of grass, it is generally fairly, if it's nice green deferred grass, it'll be good energy and protein. I've got farmers who have analyzing grass, and it's 11.5 ME and 20% protein even in winter. So, but if it's older sort of deferred grass, perhaps a bit more sort of dead material in it as well, then perhaps it won't be that high quality. So it's important to know what you've got. That's the thing. Forage crops, you can rely on standard analysis from booklets and things. But again, if you can get it analyzed, it's probably worthwhile, even if it's just for dry matter, because I was at a meeting in Southwest Scotland not that long ago, and this was a wintering meeting for beef cows, and they found that this year the dry matter of forage crops is a lot lower than it has been in the past. So again, it's important to know this because obviously, as you know, all the nutrition is in dry matter, and so if you've got a lower dry matter, then it's worthwhile knowing that. Again, when it then comes to allocating your pasture, there's different ways of doing it, but one of the sort of fairly simple ways of doing it is to do it on a percentage of the used body weight. So, for example, pre-lambing, we're looking at about 2.5% of body weight, and that should give you plenty of energy and protein to go with at that stage. If you want to do it by dry matter, sorry, by ME, the more information you've got, the better. But doing it by percentage of body weight is a fairly straightforward and easily understood sort of method of doing it. This is a page from a Quality Meat Scotland feed grass rotation planner, I should say. And the bit at the top gives you an idea of what utilization you're going to get based on how frequently you're moving them. So if you're paddock grazing in 1 to 2 day shifts, you will get higher utilization. And the longer the period before you move them, the utilization is going to drop by 5–10% each day. So for more accurate feed budgeting, you probably of sheep on grass in winter, you need to be moving them fairly frequently, ideally every day, if not every sort of other day, at least that. And then the bit at the bottom, I'll not go into that today, but it really just shows the importance of the giving fields a break in winter and the sort of rest periods to get grass in the spring. And there's different ways of doing that, obviously. One of them is by rotational grazing through the winter to give some fields a rest, and you can do that in stages across your farm. Another way, which a lot of people do, is they actually will, if they've got a shed, they can still house the sheep, and they don't house them for lambing, but can still house the sheep in mid-pregnancy, and that again is a way of giving your fields a rest to get grass for the spring. One of the worst things that you probably see is fields, sheep farms where the sheep are set stocked over a big area and everything is totally bare of grass. And any grass that grows is immediately eaten by the sheep, and you end up with no grass in spring, and it's going to cost you money in terms of forage and concentrate. So any sort of rest that you can give your grass in winter is a good thing to build up high quality grass for the spring when you really need it. Okay, so again, a very simple example here, and I've obviously made the figures work out because I'm like that. So if you've got 500 ewes of 70 kilos and they're needing 2.4% of body weight, that is 1.7 kilos of dry matter a day, or 850 for the whole group. Now, again, we're moving them every day, so we're going to go with that table of 85% utilization. You might be slightly higher. If ground conditions are good, it can be a lot higher than that. Yeah? And sometimes I think you can get 95. I'm never going to say 100%, but you can get really good utilization percent. But going with that table, 85% utilization. So you divide one by the other, it means that in actual fact, you need 1,000 kilograms for the group to be allocated for them. And again, using a very simple example of you've got 1,000 kilograms per hectare of grass available from 2.5 down to 1,500, then that means that those 500 ewes at that particular stage need a hectare. So it's fairly simple calculation. Obviously, you'll have to do that calculation based on how many ewes you've got, how many hectares you've got, what your grass covers are, and so on. And that's why, it's important to actually know what your grass covers are so that you can work out to how many grazing days have you got for the number of sheep, and when do you have to look at moving them somewhere else. Or, the other way of doing it is you can augment the grass by feeding them something else, whether it's conserved forage or even concentrate. So but the important thing, I think, as Hamish would point out to us, is actually knowing what you've got well in advance so that you can plan for these things. So if you have to feed them a bit of extra forage, with the grass or forage crop, then you know that, and you can plan accordingly. Just a little bit on a thing that's called pre-lambing rotations, which is something that a lot of sort of grass-based farms have started doing now in the last 10 years or so. And this sort of serves a few purposes really. First of all, it gives a mob of sheep some feed for the 2 to 3 weeks before they set stock for lambing, so that gets them through that period. And secondly, you are grazing a lot of the sort of old grass to sort of what's the word, promote fresh growth of high quality grass. And and it said that grazing grass in spring, not too short. We're talking about 1,400 kilos of dry matter. So you're leaving enough leaf area there for photosynthesis, but enough to remove the old growth. That actually stimulates growth as good as putting some fertilizer on it. So that's a way that some farmers use to manage this sort of winter grass and then encourage the fresh regrowth that you get after that as well. And this is something that they've done for the last 3 or 4 years at the Northumberland Monitor Farm at Alnham in Northumberland near Rothbury. And this is a mob of sheep, and the paddock on the left there is where they're about to move into, and it looks fairly lush there. This would have been about early March, and but the actual cover there isn't because it's not that dense. It's not. There's not. I think it measured at about 1,700 kilos of dry matter, and then they're grazed just in daily shifts down to about 1,400 before they moved on to the fresh grass. And that gives them really high quality grass at that time of year, as well as freshening up that paddock for growing up again for lambing time. Now, one of the things that this project at Alnham, which ran for 4 years until 2025, and I visited that farm, dozens of times in that period. And one of the things that I noticed throughout that project was that this is a farm that have moved to rotational grazing probably 10 years ago, if not, perhaps not quite 10 years ago, 9, 10 years ago. And whenever I was driving to that farm in the winter, I would notice that I would go around a corner and Alnham was green, and all the farms round about it were grey with very little grass. And I think that is testament to the power of rotational grazing, really, all through the year, but especially in winter when fields are getting rested and the chance to actually green up and recover. And I think it was very evident, even in winters when everything looked pretty grey and bleak all around about them, that you turned this corner and then suddenly there you were in a nice oasis of green. That's an aside there. Again, current wintering systems, obviously people house sheep, perhaps not so common these days, but again, if you've got a shed, there's no, you can use it, even if it's not for actual lambing, it's just for keeping the sheep off the grass. Gives you good control of the feeding and so on, but it does come with added expense and disease risk in terms of lameness and anything else that the sheep might be passing to each other. And then the outwintered systems, where to me a good outwintering system is generally where the sheep actually eat the grass or the crop that's growing, and it's not really one where you are providing too much of the feed. You're just making them eat what's growing under their feet. That saves money, it saves time, it saves work, and so on. But however, a lot of people do feed forage to sheep outside, silage and hay and so on, and you can quite often, well, I'll come on to that later, but quite often you can see some problems with feeding baled silage. One of the things I think I mentioned at the start was the feeding. Don't be afraid to feed, and this year is that. Cereal prices are pretty reasonable this year. It's not going to happen every year, but for the time being, when cereal prices are pretty low, then actually it pays to feed sometimes, and this is a good year for that, whether it's cattle or sheep, I suppose. And that also compounds can still be expensive with sort of dubious ingredients, not all of them. And if you've got the ability to mix your own home mix feed, then it's good value with the current prices if you can do it, if you've got storage and mixing facilities. And also you're going to get a feed that's of a known ME and a known protein content. Just a wee bit on grass wintering of sheep, because this is something that I've been involved with for about 12, 13 years now. And it's been a game changer for lots of people, where you basically allocate winter grass or autumn saved grass, I should say. And you're basically giving the sheep what they need. I'm going to say 1.5 kilos of dry matter, just for argument's sake, not what they can eat. So basically it means that you're saving grass that the sheep would have eaten otherwise in early part of the winter, to feed them for longer through the winter before you have to do anything else. And we're not talking about deferred grass that's fairly long and rank and falling over. You're talking about fairly high quality grass that's been saved from about September onwards. And like I said before, it can be surprisingly high quality. 11 ME, 20% protein is quite common. And to start with, I would say to people is, just keep it simple. Use your fields if they're small enough. Otherwise, subdivide bigger fields into paddocks and so on. And whatever you do, even if it's just field by field, is going to be better than just set stock in the sheep over the whole area. It's a remarkable way of realizing how much grass you've actually got, because if the sheep are spread all over the place, generally everywhere is bare, and you don't think you've got any grass. And it can help to maintain really good nutrition throughout the winter, until you actually then have to do something else. And these two pictures here are actually the same paddock, the same field, I should say, on a farm in Lanarkshire. This is about 10 years ago. And the paddock on the right in the top picture has just been grazed, and then they've been moved on to the paddock on the left, which is obviously got a fair bit of grass on. And the bottom picture is of the same two paddocks, only about 2 months later. So the first paddock, the top picture was grazed just before Christmas. I think this was 2015. And then the second picture was in the spring of 2016. And it just shows the regrowth that you can get even in winter. Low growth rates of grass in winter of, say, 5 or 10 kilos of dry matter a day. Over time, it builds up to quite a bit, and it just shows what's possible with grass on a fairly good grass on a farm like that. Okay, just to move on to feeding forage then, because obviously it's something that a lot of people do, and it's unavoidable because you've made silage and so on, and you have to feed it somehow to your sheep. And the important thing is that if the forage that you're feeding is the main source of forage for the animal, it's really important that they actually get adequate intake, because as we pointed out at the start, they need perhaps 10, 12 ME for maintenance, or much more than that as they get through pregnancy. So if the forage that you feed them is their main source of nutrition until you start feeding them concentrates, then it's important that they can actually eat it fairly easily. And the worst case scenario that you see, and I'm not saying that you won't see all of this perhaps in the same farm, is that the ewes are set stocked over a big area, so the fields are fairly bare. They're feeding silage in ring feeders with a lot of waste and poor intakes. And then you have to feed concentrates for a much longer period, or feed more concentrates for longer. So it's the worst of all worlds there, isn't it? So we also know that if you're feeding silage, especially, it needs to be eaten up within 2 or 3 days, because otherwise it's going to go off, and it's going to get dirty because the sheep will be standing on it and so on, and they will want to eat it even more after when that happens. So depending on the dry matter, obviously wet silage will need to be eaten quicker than, dry stuff will last a bit longer. If it's haylage or hay, it'll last longer, obviously. So you need, silage needs to be eaten up within a couple of days. And things like having long chop length, having bales tightly packed in ring feeders, dirty conditions around the trough where the sheep are actually jumping up on the silage and putting mud and so on onto the silage, all these sort of things, as well as things like not enough feed space, will limit dry matter intake at this crucial time. So some of the possible solutions, and I think Hamish is going to touch on this as well, is to look at chopped bales, or I think what Hamish is going to say, they sort of half chop them, because if they're fully chopped, sometimes they can just fall apart, and then you end up with more waste. And design of feeders, what can you do in terms of making it easier for the sheep to actually eat the silage, like things like splitting bales between feeders. It's not easy, I know, but just think about what you can do. And there's been a few sort of innovative farmers out there. As usual, the farmers come up with the best ideas. So these two pictures are sort of perhaps what to avoid. But this is a sort of a design of silage feeder. It's been around for a long time now. It was designed by a farmer in the borders called Duncan Shell, who very innovative, would come up with solutions on the farm with a angle grinder and a welder. And this is actually a feeder design where you can actually shake out the bale in it so that the bale is looser to start with. And it's not difficult for the sheep to pull out. It's not easy to say on that picture, but both the sides sort of hang on the frame, and the sheep can push it in from both sides. So the sheep are always pushing the barrier closer to the silage. So they've always got easy access to the feed. And there's far less waste. And there's a barrier there that you can see at the front there that stops the sheep from jumping up on each other's backs as well. And the bales will be cleared up, within 2 or 3 days. So that is, it's not, as far as I'm aware, it's not a designer feeder that's commercially available, but I do know of farmers who make them on their own farm, and there are plans going about of how to construct them as well. So if anybody's looking for that, I can probably find a reference for that if anybody's interested. Again, this is in a house situation, but obviously it could be outside as well. Is instead of having the bale plonked in a fairly tight ring feeder, which makes it harder for the sheep to pull the silage out, then they've just made a homemade extension to two sides of a ring feeder just to extend it out a bit. You're also giving yourself more feed space, but it also means that you can put your bale or 2 bales in there, and it's a lot looser for the sheep to actually pull the silage out and get, because it is important that they get this sort of dry matter intake of the forage as easily as they can. And then finally, before I hand you over to Hamish, then there's, I'm rubbish at machinery, and these things don't mean an awful lot to me other than their machinery. But I believe that there's equipment out there that allows you to split bales easily between feeders and so on, just to make it a bit easier for the sheep to pull out the forage and get that intake that they want. So I think I'm going to stop there now. Like I said, I'll answer any questions, and then I'll hand you over to Hamish. I'll hand you back to Dewi then for now. Okie dokie.
Thank you, Rhidian. Some really useful tips there. The take home for me there is the fact that, grass grows through winter, be it 5-10 kilos. And we see more of that happening as our climate warms up. So we have grass grow through winter, and if we have gate open and sheep running everywhere, we just don't see that. And I always used to find an easy way of seeing that was dropping a cage down or a shopping trolley in the days of when we were in college, because they'd always get stolen. And you put them into a paddock, and you'll actually see how much grass is growing with sheep grazing around them. So it's always a good visual to see that happens. And so many people, lots of our customers will have sheds that they will still use. They will house sheep through those deepest, darkest months, and we'll turn them out for lambing to avoid the issues that come with and the labour requirement of that. So lots of useful tips there again. I'm sure we'll come back to it afterwards. But we haven't got any burning questions here and now, so we're probably going to go straight to Hamish. And we'll pick up at the end some of these elements, if that's okay.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, Rhidian. Thank you, Dewi. Look, firstly, I'd just like to caveat the title of this webinar of Mastering Feed Budgeting to say that I haven't yet mastered feed budgeting like Rhidian, but I do see a huge amount of value in feed budgeting for ourselves and for other farmers. And for that reason, I was quite happy to come on this evening and talk to you about what we do. So yeah, there's been a lot of learnings over the years picking up this feed budgeting, and I've used sort of Dewi as a bit of a mentor for this. So yeah, this is my presentation. I run the farm up at Hoyk in the Borders. And so I'll give you a little bit of farm details as well as the overview of the grazing system. I'm going to go on to the reasons why we feed budget and why I think there's the time spent feed budgeting is so valuable. What are we actually feeding out here for winter? What are we putting down the throats of our sheep and ewe lambs and so on? So, and the different pros and cons of the winter feed options that we use for Southfield. These will be different for different farms, but this is the pros and cons for us more specifically. I'm going to talk a little bit about the feed budgeting process, although Rhidian's probably done that in more detail than I think I need to. I can just touch on it and I can show you sort of some of the spreadsheets and things that we use. And then I'll talk a little bit about other sort of basic learnings and some of the sort of tips and tricks and things that we've learned along the way. You know, we're coming through our 6th winter here now, and we've seen different seasons and things. So we have learned a few bits as we went, and we've made mistakes as well, and they're the best ones to learn from. Right, go on to the next slide, please, Lodi. Thank you. So just a little bit of background of Southfield as a farm. The farm's 630 acres or just shy of on a Buccleuch Estates tenancy. We're in our 5th year of the tenancy, and it's a 10-year tenancy in total. So we've done a lot of farm development, etc., which we might just touch on. We sit about 560 acres effective. We've planted some trees for shelter, and once you knock out the roads and there's some gorsey blocks and things, we're sitting about that 560 effective acres that we can use productively. You probably won't be able to see very well in this photograph, but the bottom of the farm's the sort of river flats down there. That's sitting just shy of 600 feet, and behind us in the photo there, we rise to about 850 feet above sea level. I think Southfield would be described as a sort of rolling upland farm with a nice balance of some sort of cuttable fields, some rougher sort of lambing type fields that are rolling, not really accessible with machinery particularly, and then there's another third or so that's sort of very much green. We call it the hill. It's not a hill by any means. It's not a heather hill, but it's the hill of the farm. So we put 1,050 ewes to the ram this year, which are all the Nucleus flock breeds. 500 ewe lambs went into winter, which is obviously quite a big number, which is challenging from a feeding them through the winter perspective, but it's very advantageous from a genetics perspective. It allows us to take a lot of ewe lambs into the winter, means we can cull anything that's not keeping up, or we really don't want to then bring into the program. It also allows us to turn over the ewe flock fairly regularly and bring the most up-to-date genetics through. So obviously it looks like a lot of ewe lambs coming in through the flock. There's quite a high replacement rate because that's because we're fairly relentless on the ewes and on the culling. The purpose of the Nucleus really is to produce breeding lambs, which go into shearlings and are then sold. We put 420 lambs into winter this season just been. They go off in about October time, again, to free up feed. We couldn't feed all of them and all the ewes and all the ewe lambs on this farm. So they go off to a sort of third-party ram grower who make an excellent job of turning them into shearlings. And then those tups are sold off those farms, either into our sales or directly to customers. So other stock on the farm, there's 25 stock cows, which are just really used up as clean-up mob. They're pretty handy to have around, and we need a sort of cattle to sheep balance on the farm just for managing pasture as well as sort of worm burdens. So a little context on the flock performance. Last year we scanned 192%. We haven't scanned this year yet. Obviously a little bit early for that, but we weaned 164% last year lambing outside. So fairly high levels of performance for an upland and outdoor lambing system. So we really need to be thinking long and hard about getting ewe nutrition right, and making sure we're feeding those ewes optimally. I will caveat that, as Rhidian said, we are aiming for production from forage, and that is the number one plan, and that's what we're using feed budgeting to do, is to meet energy requirements of livestock with forage. But we did feed a little bit of cake last year, about 5.5 tons, and that went into ewes pre-lambing. I'll go into the details of that a little bit more, but basically, aim of the game is production from forage. Thanks, Laurie. We can move on. Now, the grazing system. I thought I'd better just give a bit of context to the wider system. I know we're talking about wintering now, but I need to show you where that fits into the grazing system. So for the ewes, it's as simple as the ewes with lambs at foot rotate on rotations all summer. Coming into the sort of autumn, obviously, wean in good time. Dry ewes are put into mating groups, and they're on good quality grass in fields until about Christmas time. This brings us into the winter period. They go up onto the hill on the farm, onto deferred grass, which has been wedged up from August time. And weather dependent, they get silage at different stages into that. If we'd had a nice open back end, through January, we probably would have just given them grass. We've had a real cold, hard snap. We were predicting snow, which we didn't get, luckily, but we have put silage into the ewes at this point. We're probably aiming for about 50-50 silage to deferred grass for their sort of total feed intake. This moves us on to scanning. The singles go back up onto the hill, onto what's left of the deferred grass and just silage. Then the twins go on to Swedes, and the triples get the best quality silage. Now we've analysed the silage, and we can apportion the different stacks to the different management groups, but we try and tuck the best silage away for the triplets. We've done both. We've left them outside before. We've also put them in the shed as well. We've got a shed here that sits and does very little. It's basically a handling system. And those triplets can be put in the shed or left outside, but we do focus the best silage for them. So all of the multiples, including the triplets, go onto a pre-lamb rotation. Like Rhidian's talked about in detail, so I probably don't need to go into that too much, but basically at that point, the fields that we've tucked in are the more exposed fields on the farm. They're not suitable for outdoor lambing, but they have been rested for 100 or 120 days. So there is a nice little bite of feed there. The covers won't be massive, but the feed that is on them is very high quality. So for the pre-lamb rotation, we're meeting about 1.4 kilos of dry matter intake a day on those ewes individually from quality spring grass. And it's at that point that we can top up with a little bit of cake. We're only putting 0.2 kilos of cake into those multiples for about 2 weeks on that pre-lamb rotation. Not because the energy or protein isn't high enough in that spring grass, but just because we don't have quite enough of it, and it just buys us more grazing days on those pre-lambing rotation fields. So once we come out of them, we're coming up to about a week before lambing. All the ewes are then set stocked onto the lambing fields with no cake, just grass, and that meets all of their energy requirements. Move on, Laurie. So why feed budget? I've mentioned how important I think feed budgeting is. Well, we all know no 2 seasons are the same, and we can allow for these seasonal changes very easily with accurate feed budgeting. At Southfield, our aim is to feed ewes optimally. I feel we need to move away from the mindset of just trying to get ewes through the winter to that optimal mindset of meeting their nutritional requirements. As Rhidian said, not losing condition score on any individuals through that period. And that's the key, meeting a group's energy requirement is different to not allowing a small number of individuals to lose condition score. We don't have that problem because we're condition scoring and we're getting the nutrition right, but that's what we're trying to avoid there. Now, feed budgeting gives me a huge amount of confidence that there is enough feed and that we are meeting those energy requirements at key stages. Just gives us the peace of mind that we're not lying in bed in the evening worrying about whether we've got it right or whether we haven't. We can be fairly confident that we have because we've done everything we can to plan. Another advantage of feed budgeting is it gives us plenty of time to forecast any shortfalls before we've even started feeding. So I think most people that wouldn't be budgeting might find themselves getting halfway into a feed stack and saying, well, that's lasted 6 weeks and we've got another 6 weeks of the winter or whatever, to really understand how long that feed's lasting. Or the same with a field of forage crop. You can get halfway through it and say, well, we've got however many more weeks. With good, accurate feed budgeting, we can predict the number of grazing days before we've even touched that field, and that becomes very powerful for sort of longer term planning, and we can start planning well through seasons before we're even through them. So that for me is a real key point in the value of feed budgeting. And as I said before, we're really aiming to meet all of the livestock demand from forage. Yeah, we keep going, Lodi. So what are we feeding? I touched on there a little bit on the sort of cycle of the ewes in the bigger picture of grazing. So I'll not labour the point too much here. You can read it yourselves. But I thought I'd better touch on how we're grazing those ewe lambs as well, because we do have a big number of ewe lambs, and that is a potential for a sort of bit of a feed pinch on the farm. So we're grazing those ewe lambs sort of post-weaning on the best quality feed we can find on the farm. They're getting priority at that stage. And then by about the 1st of October, we know we need to get tup lambs off. We need to get ewe lambs off the grazing platform to save enough feed for that 1,000, 1,100 ewes. At this stage, we normally transition them onto either kale or straight onto fodder beet. This year, we grew a little bit of kale for various reasons, but basically we've got some recording tasks that needed the sheep to be close to the pens during the winter. So one of those little fields was handy to grow a bit of kale, but fodder beet would probably be our preferred option. And I'll go into the pros and cons next. Thanks. So yeah, pros and cons. There's obviously lots of different pros and cons of different winter feeds. These are just what the major pros and cons are for us at Southfield, considering our sort of climatic factors and our stocking rate, etc. So we'll just start with grass. Everybody's banging on all the time about grass is our lowest cost feed source, sitting at 6p per kilo of dry matter, probably less. The challenge with grass is obviously that it doesn't grow at stock demand rate all winter. Dewi's absolutely right in saying, we are getting nice grass growth through the winter, especially with sort of young lays and better managed lays, but there will become a point where we probably run out of feed. This is the point where Rhidian talked a little bit about deferred grass. We can wedge up, and that's what we try and do here. We try and get all the way to Christmas with the ewes on grass, so that they become the highest sort of priority stock class in that autumn around that tupping period. But basically grass will only last so long at higher stocking rates, whole farm stocking rates. So the obvious choice really is sort of grass silage and siling, which we're all very aware of being an option, and it's a very common option. Making grass silage is very flexible. It can be very high quality if we get it right. It can also be fairly average quality feed if we get it wrong. So that's important, is trying to make high quality silage and analysing your different cuts and understanding which cuts to feed at different times. Now, the disadvantage of grass silage is it does effectively double the cost per kilo of dry matter compared to grazing that grass. And then you've got a bit of cost feeding it back out as well. So we need to not get into too much of a trap of making lots of silage because it is expensive. It's inherently expensive with the sort of energy that goes into it, diesel, fuel, machinery, we all know the costs. So that's when the forage crops really come into their own for Southfield. Now we're growing, and we have grown various different crops at different stages. This year we grew that kale, like I mentioned before. It's low cost and it's highly palatable. Kale really fleshes out lambs. If you've got any leftover tail end lambs, finishing them on kale is a really good option. The disadvantage of kale we've found in this climate anyway is that the winter hardiness does sort of drop away into the new year. So we always try and have that sort of zipped off by sort of end of January time. Otherwise the leaves start getting frosted and go soft, and the lambs do turn off them a little bit. So if we're growing kale, that really is only ever to take them up to about the end of January time. I know people can carry it longer, and we could if we need to, but ideally we have that zipped off to not get any waste. This brings us on to the Swedes. Now, Swedes are very winter hardy. We're growing invitation Swedes here at Southfield because it's the most winter hardy variety that we can get our hands on. And it's excellent quality, and it will meet the energy requirements of ewes quite close up to lambing. So that's where we use it. Swedes are, however, quite hard to grow consistently. We've always done all right here, but we've got a pretty I wouldn't call it foolproof system, but we're using the plow, for example, to make sure we're burying weed seeds, etc. There's no herbicide options for Swedes left at all, and flea beetle can be a challenge as well, with not being able to use treated seed anymore. So vigilance is really needed for getting a good consistent crop of Swedes. There's no point growing a forage crop if you're going to plow the ground up and you're not going to get the yield on it. So therein lies some of the advantages of the fodder beet, which we've grown for the second year and are feeding out this year. There's huge yield potential with fodder beet, and that's one of the attractions for us to slow down our rotation a little bit. We've got the beet this year did 20.2 tonne of dry matter per hectare, which is the opportunity to grow a big heap of feed on a small area, which is quite attractive when we're not wanting to lose too much grass out of our rotation. The disadvantages of fodder beet, probably less winter hardy than the Swedes, but maybe a bit more than the kale. And we do just need to watch the lower protein levels than brassicas. So the right stock classes at the right stages of pregnancy, for example, with ewes, needs to just be considered with the fodder beet. Now, I had to include concentrate feeds there just as a comparison. Concentrates are very flexible, and they are a tool in the toolbox which we use at points, but we're really trying to avoid it because they're extremely expensive comparatively. They're 6 or so times the cost on a pence per kilo dry matter basis versus grazed grass, and very similar qualities to good spring grass, for example. So that's something we just need to watch. We'll move on, Lodi. Thanks. Go back. Oh no, sorry. Feed budgeting of grass. I was getting ahead of myself there. This is just an example of our spreadsheet. Rhidian went through the sort of step by steps, and I won't labor the point too much on that. I was hoping he was going to cover that, and he's done that quite professionally. This is the spreadsheet that we've put together internally. So this is the budget that I put together for tupping this year, just as an example. Basically, the information in the spreadsheet formulas, you can fairly easily put together off the back of some of the information that Rhidian's put forward. There's some good farm advisory services and SAC technical notes on it. We're happy to share this spreadsheet if people want to have a look at it and change it up for their own farms. And also guys like Rhidian, I'm sure, are very happy to help people put together spreadsheets like this for their own farms. So in this scenario, we've run around with a plate meter. We've got this spreadsheet set up with all the fields on the farm, and we just plug in the kilos of dry matter in all these different fields. The spreadsheet's laid out that basically it'll give us how many total kilos are available in each field. And because we plug in the information and the yellow bar at the top, which is sheep number, the weight of those ewes, our predicted intake at the different stages of them being dry or pregnant, mid-pregnancy, etc. The spreadsheet formulas are set up so that they will basically times intake by the number of sheep to give us total demand. And because this is grazing grass, there's a target residual calculation in here. So basically, the long and short of this and the output that we're trying to create is the number of days grazing on fields, because obviously it's easily tangible. It gives you the period of time that those sheep should be able to graze in that field. So the scenario here was we plate metered all the fields that we thought we were going to use for tupping. We totaled them all up. The spreadsheets told us at the bottom here of the total demand column that there's 35 days grazing there, which I thought, excellent, great. We've got a week, 10 days easily to flush the ewes on those tupping fields. and then tup them for, say, 20 days, which is what we did this year. So that gives us the confidence that we've got enough feed on all our tupping fields. Great. Now we need to break that down a little bit for the management groups. So in a commercial setting, say you've got 1,050 ewes, you might put 550 of them to a maternal sire, for example. So you just plug in 500 ewes into the sheep numbers, click enter, and it will tell you which fields you can use basically to get the number of tupping days you need for that group. So from that, you can start building practical grazing plans, because a lot of this stuff is great theoretically. You can work out what a ewe's going to eat. You need to be able to trickle that down to something that you can actually use, or your shepherds or your team can use to go and make grazing and management decisions. So I won't labor the point too much on that, but I thought I'd better just show that spreadsheet. So we'll move on to my next table. Basically, this is the same spreadsheet, but that we've just modified slightly for forage crops. So this example is for the ewe lambs that we've put into winter, which is these 500 ewe lambs. I actually did this ahead of time, basically planning how much crop to put in how many fields. So Rhidian touched on measuring crop. You know, what we do is we go out with a meter set square and we measure how much fresh weight is on a meter square across a few points in the field. We can total that up to give us the kilos of dry matter a hectare once we've done a few little calculations, which can just give us the fresh weight to dry matter content. And basically this spreadsheet comes into its own at this point. So for example, here we've got the gate field. We know the size of the field. We know how many total kilos of dry matter we've grown on that field. And from that, we can get the number of days grazing from this spreadsheet of that we've implemented the 500 or inputted, sorry, the 500 ewes into, or ewe lambs in this example. We've also laid the bales out on this field, so we need to allocate the or work out the allocation of the dry matter from silage as well, and make sure we've got that included. So that's what the second row is, basically the total kilos of silage. We've weighed some of those bales and we've analysed them, so we know their dry matter content. So very quickly we know there's 90 silage bales on that field and they've got about 220 kilos of dry matter in them. So we get that total nice and easily. And the key and the end point of this is getting the 156 days of grazing on that field. So straight away I knew I had plenty of winter feed. We probably only need 140 days grazing, and we got it in that. Now, the sort of next step of this and the next advantages of this feed budgeting is basically that we can start making changes. So a good scenario here, and what we've done this year, is we've put 120 ewe lambs onto some opportunistic grazing on an arable farm that we got offered some rye and vetch that we didn't really know we were going to be having. So what I can do here is I can knock out those 120 ewe lambs. I can tell myself or work out how many extra days grazing we've got on that field for different stock classes. So the plan in this situation is we'll probably put some of the gimmers off the hill, we'll add them to that mob, and we can very quickly create some scenarios of how long we could maybe add them to that mob for and how many days grazing we're going to get from making these sorts of changes. So that's just a practical example of where this feed budgeting becomes really flexible for planning and forward planning. Yeah, so learnings. Rhidian had a lot of really good learnings in his presentation there. So I'll just share the ones that we've sort of pulled out over time from being here for a few winters now. This is our 6th winter. So we've done things right, we've done things wrong, and we've just started to sort of streamline stuff as well. So we are aiming to utilize the right crop at the right time. I've done the pros and cons of the different crops, but you know, you wouldn't want to grow a whole load of fodder beet and create a huge amount of yield to finish just some lambs in the back end that'll be gone by Christmas, for example. So kale might be a better option in that situation. So really think ahead about when you want to use your forage crops before you've grown them, and what those jobs are going to be. And that will target what crops you grow in the end. I wouldn't focus just on like dry matter yield like a lot of people do. You really need to think about when to utilize those crops. So yeah, break feed as much as possible to lift utilization. Rhidian had some good numbers on grass utilization rates. I'm sure it's fairly similar for forage crops. The utilization really increases based on giving a smaller area and more regular shifts. So we're trying to do that just as much as we can. That's much easier to put fences up on bulbs, so the Swedes and the fodder beet, for example. It's much easier to move a fence one drill at a time or a couple of drills at a time, as opposed to kale, which is towering up at height, and you need to run it over with a tractor or the bike, for example, to get your 3-wire electric fence up. And in that, you are wasting some feed in flattening it. So you wouldn't want to be doing that every day. It would probably be more suitable for a weekly break, for example. And another consideration, a lot of people get put off with the thought of daily breaks. If you're going out to check animals on a daily basis, it's very little extra time just to move a fence. And we've found it's a really good way to balance intakes. So, for example, on most of the brassicas and the fodder beet as well, a lot of the protein is in the tops on these crops, and a lot of the energy is in the bulb or in the stalk. So giving a daily break is giving a really nice balanced intake on a daily basis. It's giving them that protein and energy in an even balance. So as much as possible, we need to be putting fences up. A lot of the modern electric fencing gear is pretty quick and easy to be putting up, and definitely is worth the time as much as possible. Yeah, we need to be feeding roughage with these forage crops. We need to be feeding, we're aiming to give them 20 or 25% of their intake on forage crop from a roughage source, either hay or silage. We're really favoring silage. We're making big bale silage, and then we're laying those bales out on crop, which we're in the second year of doing, and it's working really, really effectively. We're doing that for a couple of reasons. It means all the feed's out there already. We don't need to drive out through the winter with a tractor into mucky fields. That's a major advantage. We just cut the plastic off the bale and roll the ring feeder down with every break. It does take a little bit of planning. You need to sort of estimate your dry matter yields and try and get the right percentage of silage out there, but with a little bit of tweaking, you can get that right. And you might need to work on a few frosty days, moving a few bales around here and there, but after a season or two, you can really start to sort of hone that in. It's good from a sort of safety perspective too. It means less people are out in the tractor in the winter as well on banks and things. So it just means anybody can go out and move the electric fences, which just saves hassle in the winter, really. It means we can delegate nice and easily. Basically, if you are laying bales out, you want to be doing that once all the cropping passes are done. We need to be doing that really once the fert's been done and the sprays are done. So we've been laying those bales out on tram lines in those fields just to reduce waste as well. The forage crops are a great break for permanent pasture. We found there's been a lot of old lays on this farm that hadn't been turned over in a long time. So we've used the forage crops to turn them over, break worm cycles, and it's just a great entry for a grass reseed on the other side. Another advantage that a lot of people don't think of the forage cropping is that it leaves behind a lot of nutrients. So a lot of the forage crop nutritional requirements, i.e. fert requirements, are aimed to take that crop off. But actually, when we're grazing these crops, we're leaving that nutrition behind effectively. We're leaving that in sort of pea and poo that the stock are leaving behind. And that's a really valuable resource then for the grass reseeds that go in the spring after it. And that means we don't need to use any starter fert or anything like that. And that kind of gets the clovers going and things too. So that's been another sort of consideration that we've found over time. Proper agronomy pays dividends, again, focusing on the forage crops. We're using an agronomist, a local agronomist, Neil McLean, who works for Agri-Eye. And the time he spends and the cost he puts into his sort of management and oversight on these crops really, really pays itself off multiple times over. He can just meet the nutritional requirements, i.e. the fert plan's right, little bit of timeliness when we do need sprays, etc. And he probably pushes us to monitor these crops closer than we might. A lot of people might, though there's a danger that you could grow a forage crop and not spend enough time and effort on getting it right. If we get it right, we get the yields, and that pays the cost off better. We're at the point with the Swedes and things, especially when it's coming through, that when we're checking sheep, we drop into the Swede field and have a quick run around as well, because you can easily miss things like flea beetle, etc. So that's one of the learnings there. Probably my final and most simple learning is livestock behind wires get plenty of power into them. So those 3-wire fences, especially with sheep, need to probably be doing about 6,000 volts. You can get down to about 4 with cattle and get away with it, but sheep have obviously wool to insulate. So there's nothing more frustrating for people is seeing stock breaking through fences. So make sure you've got decent energizers and you're keeping batteries and stuff charged on solar units, etc. So those were the sort of major learnings that came to my mind on this. I've got one little bit extra loady on trace elements and minerals next. So I'm no expert on minerals and trace elements, but I know that it's important year round. We work with a fellow, Chris Williams, at Clinwell Nutrition, and he's basically formulated specific mineral buckets based on forage samples from this farm. So the practicalities of that are either going out and getting some growing grass samples, or even when you send your silage analysis away, get it done for minerals, trace elements, micronutrient level. And off the back of that, of what we've done here at Southfield, Chris has identified the shortfalls, but also any antagonists that have been here, and basically allowed us to create this tailored bucket for the farm, which I think is quite important year round, but obviously through the winter as well. So I just thought that was probably worth mentioning as well. Now, I think that's me pretty much exhausted my information. Any questions? I don't know if there's anything come through or not, Dewi. But
yeah, Hamish, there's a heap of questions. So I'm just gonna cover the ones that are specifically related to the crops, because there's quite a few come through.
Yeah.
And then we'll come back to Rhidian afterwards on that, if that's okay. So just very briefly, when do we establish the forage crops, Hamish, and what yields are we getting on the Swedes?
Yeah, so a little bit weather dependent. We're relying on contractors here. This year we got our crops in as early as we have ever. The kale went in 26th of April, which was early, to the point the agronomist was a little bit nervous, but we didn't have any bolting problems. Basically anything really from sort of early May onwards. We need to be careful of early frosts, which is the thing that always makes us nervous, and it's really contractor availability as well. So, but we found that the photo there with the tractor sitting in the kale, that kale went in 26th of April, and that's the biggest kale crop we've had yet, and it's mature at this stage now in January time. So yeah, that's the kale establishment. The kale did 9 ton of dry matter a hectare this year. The Swedes have done 10 ton. They went in a little bit later. They went in end of May, I think. Again, just trying to get them early, and we're trying to get a good bulb on them, because we're utilizing those Swedes late in the season, like in February time, mid-February, we start grazing them. We want to have got them in early. It got a big bulb because it's the bulb specifically that we find is the winter hardy part of that crop. So yeah, that did 10 ton. The variety was invitation.
And Hamish, we're lucky to have a really good contractor out, in terms of they come when they say they're going to come, and they blitz it, really. So
yeah, and that makes all the difference. But we don't have any equipment here really, or next to none, and we rely on contractors for everything. So giving them plenty of warning on when we want things done and what we want done, and then they can plan it in ahead. That seems to have been working pretty well.
And those are the Glendinning boys. We know you're on the call, so.
Oh, are they? Is Andrew on? Good. That'll be in the good books. I'll be the first on the silage list this year.
Yeah. Hamish, there's a question. Do you have any run back with the kale?
Yeah, generally with all the forage crop fields, because we're planning it a little bit ahead in good time, and there's normally an old grass field that we can run back to, I'm pretty much using a whole field, an old permanent pasture field, as a run back.
Sure.
That's handy at first when we go into a field, because we're feeding quite small breaks, and you wouldn't want the animals to just be in quite a small area. From a containment perspective, they'd probably be likely to break through. So we're really just using a neighbouring field as a run back. Some of the fields with nows and banks and things, we use them as the run back, but most of the time we're giving them a full field to run back to, because it just gives them plenty of area to be clean on.
Cool. We've got a comment here, which is a great one from Paul Allison, saying, Hamish, try 3.5% by seed number, brown mustard or radish in your kale or Swedes. It can act as a trap plant for flea beetle. So thank you, Paul. That sounds a really good solution.
Definitely worth trying.
To do that, which is great. So that's a really good tip as opposed to a question. So thank you. That's great. There's a question in terms of, do we lift any fodder beets to feed on fields? Again, I think you've covered the fact that we feed them in place, but whether you want to just cover that, Hamish?
Yeah, it's always an option. The minute, as Rhidian touched on before, the minute we start handling materials, we add cost. So, harvesting equipment is quite specialized for something like fodder beet. We're in an upland area. Nobody's really growing fodder beet or sugar beet. So we need to have that equipment. As I say, or as Rhidian said, sorry, the easiest and cheapest way to utilize this feed is by putting an electric fence up and letting the animals do the work. And that needs to be number one always. But it's a tool in the toolbox if we need it, but it just doubles the cost per kilo of dry matter.
We have done that in other farms, haven't we, Hamish? We've used a riddle bucket, we've used the feeder out, but generally, as you say, feeding in situ and using the right variety that's above the ground enables you to get good utilization, really. So there's a question here from Cormac asking, are we bolusing use on the fodder beet or iodine? I think you've covered it with the buckets, but do you want to just expand on that maybe?
Yeah, we're just giving them free access mineral buckets pretty much year round. I probably do need to speak to Chris just to make sure we're meeting those requirements, especially for a longer period that we're feeding out the ewe lambs on the beet.
I think Chris is on the Zoom tonight, but again, I suppose the beauty of those mineral buckets is that they don't cost any more than your standard off-the-shelf buckets, but you're actually giving exactly what's needed to balance the farm out. So it's an interesting learning we've had over the years, but it does unlock a huge amount of potential we found. So Craig's asking the question, Hamish, are the shearlings on a maintenance diet for the winter post-tupping with the ewes? Curious if it's possible to meet their growing feed needs on bale grazing.
Yeah, good question. I work pretty hard through the summer to get those shearlings up to a good weight. We pretty much cruise them. So as ewe lambs, we pretty much cruise them through that first winter. They're just runners at that stage. So we don't need to get a lot of growth out of them. But coming into their second summer, they get well fed. It's not always the best quality feed, but they're always full, and we're trying to really get them up on their sort of dry matter intake. So we're probably budgeting on about 3%, if not a little bit more, of their intake on a dry matter basis. So if we're getting them up to a good weight by tapping, we're not too worried about trying to keep growing them out. But in the scenario that I talked about before, having surplus fodder beet to graze, the next most important management group would probably be put the gimmers onto that fodder beet. So that's what we're looking to do just in the next week or so.
Yeah. And quite often, Hamish, if you've got any concentrate spare from the ewes, although we don't have very much anyway, you will put it out to those ewe hogs to teach them to eat.
Yeah. Again, it's just about having tools in the toolbox. If they've seen a little bit of feed before, I think we had a ton left over last year, so we fed them for like 2 weeks just to literally train them to eat, so that when it comes to shearlings, or if we get a beast from the east winter, for example, again, they can go straight onto it, and we don't have a couple of weeks of sort of training periods. So yeah.
And then how often do we condition score the ewes, Hamish? Post-upping,
so off the top of my head, I think we do them 4 times for the breeding program. That goes into their condition score EBVs. In the maternal breeds, we have a body condition score EBV, which basically evaluates whether those sheep can maintain condition score. over sort of key production periods. So we do it 4 times for that, and I will often chuck 1 or 2 more in if I feel the need, or if I think there's maybe a subgroup that may need lifted at weaning, for example. So just off the top of my head, it would be probably weaning. We might do 1 again post-weaning. We do 1 into the tupping groups, possibly 1 out of the tupping groups if the geneticists want us to, and then we'll probably do a sort of midwinter one, and we do a scanning as well, so anything up to sort of 6 condition scores.
And then Rich is asking, how, in terms of tupping ewe lambs, Hamish, we don't currently, obviously, although we have at different stages. Where are we with all of that?
Good question. A lot of the breeding partners in the breeding program are tupping ewe lambs successfully. It's probably something I would like to be doing here. We are, however, doing a little bit of trial work on some of the maternal ewe lambs, which would be the obvious ones to tup. So some of them are on a feed efficiency trial. From now onwards, they went in yesterday onto a feed efficiency trial, and for that reason, we can't have some of them in lamb and some of them not. So the Breed for Change project that's involved with is coming to an end, and that might be something we change. The challenge always with tupping ewe lambs is having enough quality feed and getting a lamb out of them, not asking too much of her, and getting her up to a shearling weight. That in the past, with less quality feed here at Southfield earlier on and in previous farms we've been in, has always been the challenge, hasn't it, Dewi? Just, getting those ewe lambs to regain enough condition to do well and perform as a ewe all the way through her lifetime.
Yeah, indeed. And that's something, like Hamish says, we do have quite a lot of our breeding partners that do tup ewe lambs. So we have that trait, if you like, in the selection process. Hamish runs his ewe lambs quite hard. They have to work and acclimatise to the farm. So currently, in terms of the way Southfield operates, we work them hard through the winter. That may change. And because we do lots of methane measurements and stuff on them, which means that we can't have them in lamb at 3 times of the year, that's kind of overshadowing that selection element, but it's something we're always keeping an eye on, really. Max has asked the question, what's the impact on selecting genetics that thrive on systems that rely on winter feed rather than genetics that can winter on grass and deferred grass? None really, Matt, as far as we can see, and we do this across the country with our different breeding farms. We've got best part of 10, 11,000 ewes across 20 different farms. They all run things slightly differently. Some run on grass, some run on crops. What Hamish is talking about here is a scenario where those ewes on winter crops, those ewes are on deferred grass and grass through the whole year. They're only on that winter crop for 4 weeks on those Swedes, twins, triplets. So the majority of the year is on grass. So what we find is that as long as they've been asked to compete, to work in big groups under pressure, be it under crop conditions or be it under grass conditions, we seem to find the same selection pressure happening where we can select sheep that will do it. That's a very different scenario to sheep, obviously, that are put into a more comfortable environment where they don't have to work for their existence. So all the research and all the work we've seen suggests that, be it on forage, be it on crops, be it on grass only, the crucial thing is that they're under challenge running in big commercial groups, and that effectively that's pulling the ones that can and can't out. And Hamish has a high replacement rate because we're continually putting sheep to the sword in Southfield. We're continually using new genetics coming in. And we won't cull on age. If there's 7, 8-year-old ewes producing, they'll very much stay in there. But all too often we have sheep that aren't cutting it, and they're the ones that get pulled out, unfortunately, from it. Michael's asked the question, would boluses do instead of mineral buckets? And we're not advocating one or the other in some ways. We have farms that are using boluses. In our particular instance, because we can tailor that bucket specifically to the nutrients of the farm, or the deficits of the farm, deficiencies of the farm, we get a much better result with that bucket because it's doing specifically what we need. We will put a mineral dose in at key times if needs be, if there's a challenge at weaning or something, but we know that that dose will last 4 weeks at most. So realistically, we get much better results because we tailor to the farm as opposed to using a generic off-the-shelf product, and I think that's the main difference. There is obviously a risk with buckets that they provide a reservoir if you have disease. We're not too worried in Southfield, but I know some flocks that have OPA and other elements where they don't want that reservoir of nose to nose. There's something that people have to be wary of. There's a few questions that we've archived, which I'll just come back to very quickly, and then we'll play you a quick video to show the place. I think we've answered the yields one on the crops. I'm just running through the questions here. There's a question for you, Rhidian, but I'll come to you after if that's okay. Hamish, what stocking rate at lambing time are we running?
Good question. You put me on the spot there. We probably lamb over about 170 acres, which is just the more sheltered fields on the farm. So 1,050 ewes over about 170 acres. Do the maths.
Yeah, so I think generally speaking, we historically would have run twins on about 5 to the acre and singles up to about 8 or 10. It depends. Sometimes we have to adjust depending on how many fields we've got in that sheltered catchment, doesn't it? But generally speaking, we don't drift lamb. We lamb in the fields. Lambing is pretty tight within 20 days, so they don't take long to do it really. So yeah. There's a question here on herbal lays, Hamish, if we've used herbal lays. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I can. I mean, the lays we're using are a sort of 10-year mix from Field Options called Highlander. We're putting a bit of plantain in that, and it's got a lot of decent white clovers and stuff in it. That's the sort of long-term mix. And then we're putting a cutting mix in, which is their Grassmaster Pro Nitro, I think it's called, which is basically a 4 to 6 year mix with hybrid ryegrasses and red clover and stuff in it. So that's a sort of slightly more productive lamb finishing, silage making mix if we need it. We've not gone too hard down the sort of herbal route. Dewi's played with that quite a bit more in previous farms. We are grazing a lot of sheep, and we do want to maintain quality. My grazing management is mediocre to maybe just slightly above average, but things like chicory are quite hard to manage with just sheep in some of these herbal lays. But there's probably more we could do there, especially on some of the drier, bankier fields. It's probably the next step.
Hamish's grassland management is much better than he's giving himself credit for, by the way. Rhidian, there's just a couple of questions maybe it's worth us asking you before we play a short video. Let me just get to them very quickly. There was one specifically for Rhidian from Rich asking, Rich grazes ewes out during winter, but house them in February for lambing. They have clam silage, 29% dry matter, 15% crude protein, 12 ME. They normally feed this to cattle and drier bales to the sheep, but is this suitable for feeding the ewes while lambing to where they are housed, or would you still plan to feed concentrates to the twins and triplets as well?
Well, yeah, first of all, well done for making such good quality silage.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. I would always say, feed your best silage to your pregnant sheep. Obviously, it depends what other type of cattle you have competing for that, but definitely it's good enough for pregnant sheep. You probably don't want, if the ewes are in good condition, you wouldn't need an awful lot of extra feed with that. Possibly some high DUP concentrates, because that if it's 15% protein, 12 ME, then there's enough protein there for that energy level to cope with already in the rumen. So any extra that the sheep might need, like twins and triplets, would be in the form of bypass protein. So which leads me back to Dewi and Hamish, I suppose, because I know that at Southfield they get a high DUP nut made up, don't you? Which would be a similar. Years ago when I was working with SAC and John Vipond, there was a lot of emphasis on feeding high DUP feeds with very high quality silage to sheep in late pregnancy. And back then, obviously, it was mostly soya we were recommending, but these days soya is not such a desirable thing to feed. So I know you guys are using feed made from a treated rape meal, I believe, Dewi?
Yes, we are. We get it done with Sean in Buccleuch, so it's a concentrate that Sean gets for himself and us. And I think Hamish, the crew protein is it 27 or 28 or maybe 26? I'm not sure actually.
26.5, I think it was last year. Yeah.
And we're feeding, I think, about 100 grams per fetus.
Yeah, correct. 100 grams per fetus, and it's got sort of double rate minerals in it, I suppose, as well, because obviously you're feeding a much smaller amount of cake. It needs to have a little bit more cake minerals wise.
Yeah.
And the reason for doing that, Rhidian, is that, as we've discussed, that pre-lambing rotation is always a squeeze for us, where Hamish will have closed in the autumn. It depends how early or late the spring is, because we go into those exposed fields for that pre-lamb rotation. And quite often we just haven't got enough grazing days ahead of us. So actually it does two things for us, really. It gives us those more grazing days before we drop into the lambing fields where we have covers built. And it also gives us that reassurance, I suppose, that nutritionally we're giving those ewes just that little bit better quality protein at that very crucial stage. And the ewes normally go bouncing into those fields, Hamish, and you assist 2% maybe. So, ewes, but again, a huge amount of work will have gone into making sure that those ewes are hitting those lambing fields in conditions for 3.
Yeah.
So that's been.
So you're feeding that for a specific reason, but that's the sort of thing that you would want to feed in that house situation as well. I would suggest that, if you fed a normal 18% cake with very little bypass protein in it, if you buy commercial products, then you're going to be wasting a lot of that money. Whereas what you actually need is something with a higher level of DUP bypass protein to supplement that really high quality silage that you've got.
Yeah, which I hope that answers your question. But I'm sure Rhidian will make sure that you get Rhidian's contact details and the recording that goes out to you all, so you can contact him directly, because he's a wealth of knowledge and available to consult to people. So there is a question in terms of our drop in lamb numbers from 192 to 164. I've explained that we do have Campylobacter that's been circulating in the flock historically. We've also had a PhD student, Kim, staff member, who's been doing postmortems. We do have quite a lot of details on the lamb drop-offs and numbers. I don't know if you want to expand anything on that, Hamish, really? Why we lose lambs?
Not really. I suppose there is a bit of selection pressure here. Those lambs that are dropping off are probably not ones we want to be selling to a customer anyway. I do my best on the lambing fields, but I'm not wildly proactive. We drive around, we do sort of three runs around the lambing beat a day. It's not intensive at all. This last year I did 1,000 ewes myself in the fields. As Dewi said, we're assisting very low rates, but there is a little bit of a drop off. And my argument, if you're a commercial customer buying tups or buying rams from somebody, you probably don't want to be buying from somebody that's keeping everything alive. There isn't the selection pressure there, and they're not really going to go onto a commercial system and breed the next generation of hardy sheep. So that would be my only thought on it. I could do better, and we probably should be doing better. But as we've increased the scanning rate up to 192, because we've steadily increased it every single year that we've been here, we've increased the weaning rate pretty much proportionally. So I think that's telling we're not getting a higher and higher scan and just losing more, because that would be a waste of time. There'd be no point chasing those higher scans. But I think
and it's probably worth explaining that although it's a 192 overall, there is a breed effect there. So Highlanders, for example, will be scanning over 200. Aberdale's the same. The Cheviot will be at 175. Some of the meat breeds will be down closer to the 170. So this is an average across all those breed lines. So there's a range in there, really. Rhidian, just one last question for you. Christine is asking, where do you find information on the value of feed in acid grassland, heather, where sheep are grazed out on a common from December until March? Not that many sheep are grazed out these days, to be fair. So, Christine, I'm glad there's some people having sheep still up on those commons. So, in terms of feed value, Rhidian, is it a matter of analysing, or
I would say definitely. I mean, there'll be such a variation. That's the trouble with different habitats and things. So really, if you're in any doubt, get a wet chemistry analysis done through any sort of lab that does forage analysis, and you can assume, I suppose, based on level of dead material, green matter, and so on, roughly what it might be. But if you want any sort of accuracy, you need to get it analysed. That's what I would advise. And also, in terms of yield as well, obviously, Hamish and I have been talking about kilos of dry matter and plate meters and so on. Plate meters are great, but they're only really suitable for measuring ryegrass, white clover type swards between 3 and 15 centimeters. If you're starting to measure red clover, herbal lays, rough grazing, silage fields, whatever isn't in that sort of grazing parameter grass, then it's going to be inaccurate. It's fine. It's very good for measuring the sort of grass that Hamish is grazing, gives you an idea anyway. But for measuring hill grass, it's not. It's if you want to know how much grass you've got, the most accurate way is probably to cut some quadrats with some clippers.
Yeah. Thank you, Rhidian. We're just going to play you a very quick video of some of the stuff that happens in Southfield. So hopefully this will help visualize some of the stuff Hamish has been talking about. And I will pick up the last couple of questions just after this, if that's okay. So this will be deferred grazing, Hamish, on the top. This is the hill block in Southfield where we'll be keeping some ground, and then sheep are up there now, Hamish, from their tupping groups.
Yeah, that's right.
So this will be best part of just over 1,000 ewes running as one group. Still getting that fresh nibble, as Hamish says, so that block grazing through that place and silage being dropped into them as we go through, really. You're using ring feeders and rolling some bales out, Hamish, as they go through those blocks. And they're going to live up there really from the end of tupping, end of December, all the way through until beginning of Feb. At that point, then they go down, and this is sheep into pre-lamb rotations, where the sheep actually grazing through the farm on the more exposed fields. And this is the point we will split them further down from that, Hamish. You'll have them into their groups based on their scan, won't you, in terms of they are. And you'll see not a lot of grass there, as Rhidian's been explaining, but it makes a remarkable difference if they're actually grazing through paddocks, leaving a residual, then moving then to the next ones. So, and sheep in pretty good condition with Hamish all through the year, really, because we make sure they're bred to be that. So you'll see coming through into scanning. Scanning normally, Hamish, is done with the end of January.
Yeah, normally sort of
beginning of Feb. And as you can see, all the ewes, all the breeds running as one, because there's no real place to hide. The only things that have been pulled out of there is sheep that Hamish is unhappy with in terms of their ability to thrive in that environment. So again, running through. Normally, Hamish, you have to break them into their breeds for scanning, because we're also doing fetal aging. So to be able to do that about a few times of the year where the breeds are broken down, because the scanner gets a more accurate picture, doesn't he, when he's scanning? Obviously, lots of data being captured all the time with all these sheep. The twins, which there's normally about 700 odd, Hamish, into the Swedes, or 40, depending which so after they've scanned, those sheep come off the hill and go into those. As you can see, Hamish will spread all those bales out as he's discussed there, clearing through, and pretty good utilization, Hamish, across the board with those.
Yeah, pretty high utilizations, probably budgeting on between 70 and 80% on those daily breaks, probably closer to 80.
And as you can see, the lambing field, which are the more shelter fields, covers will have been built up in those. The pre-lamb rotation will have gone around first, and they're dropping into those lambing fields in covers, normally 1,800, 2,000, most of them, and they're lambing down for that period of time. The marks on the backs there of the lambs, Hamish goes through those lambs when they're about a day old, marks their week of birth, the sort of the wage on them. And then once they're mobbed up, you start back onto rotations. So this will be big groups, and I don't know how big those groups are, Hamish. There'll be a couple of hundred ewes, lambs in each group, will they?
Yeah, anything up to sort of 250 ewes with lambs at foot is a kind of sweet spot for the field sizes we've found.
And it's amazing how quickly these sheep learn in terms of the rotations, in terms of their movements, isn't it, Hamish? You move them quite easily from place to place. So yeah, so really that's the gist. Just to finish off on a couple of questions, Anne was asking, please expand on a tight lambing period. Is that down to teaser ram sponges or anything else? Do you want to just expand on that, Hamish?
Yeah. Really, we only want to be taking replacements and selling tups off stuff off animals that are bred in the first cycle, effectively. So this has just been a product of 15 plus years of selecting sheep for fertility and just, giving them one chance and one chance only. And really, over time, they're lowly heritable traits, but cumulatively over time, you just get fertile sheep off the back of it. So so we're really just aiming for one cycle, give them just slightly over, just for anything that's sitting on the ends of those 17-day cycles. And then we just put some sweepers out, some raddled up sweepers, and then they're just killing lambs because they're crossbreds.
Yeah, so 20 days normally, Hamish, isn't it? And then we mix all the ewes back up. They go back up the hill with sweepers, normally Primeras or Abermax meat grams. And we normally get about 94%, 95% of the ewes lambing to their breed, if you like, within those first 20 days. So again, building fertility into those animals in there, really, within it. So hopefully that answers your question. And we do use teasers as well, but generally speaking, it's a selection pressure in terms of with that, really. I think we've got, I might have mentioned we enrolled odd bale. Most of the bales you're feeding out the ring feeders, Hamish, for the ewes and cattle, really, aren't you?
Yeah. So, for example, today, I put some bales out. There's a big mob of 1,000 ewes. What I'll normally do is I'll normally go out and just for my sanity and safety of those animals as we're feeding bales out, I'd normally just unroll one bale off a bank or something. And that basically satisfies any ewes that want to mob up, and then they can all get access to feed very quickly and easily, and they basically get some off my back for putting bales out. So we've toyed with rolling bales out a little bit, and I know people are getting on quite successfully with it, mostly in cattle from what I've seen. I think sheep are very selective, and if they've stood on grass at all or conserved forage, they are bad for wasting it. I think if
we are doing it in in 2-day rotations on some of our ram growing units that we don't have quite enough cover. So in that instance, we are rolling bales out ahead into the next break all the time. But because they're 2-day breaks or 3-day breaks, they're cleared up before they move on. So it's quite specific in how they're hitting it, really. So, but generally, you get on pretty well with the ring feeders, don't you? So
yeah. Can I just add to that I agree that entirely that sheep can be very fussy, and if you don't watch out, they just be lying on the hay, and that's just a waste. But in conditions like we see this week around the country, where there's snow on the ground, then obviously that's a different matter. You want to make sure they are getting plenty of food if they can't dig through snow. I mean, a couple of days isn't going to hurt them if they're in good condition, but a prolonged period of time when they can't eat grass, then they need to have easier access to hay, and rolling out might be an option at that point. Yeah,
which I'm sure our friends in Aberdeen are having to consider right now, really, with everything going on. So, last question, because I'm conscious we're running over. Not that it bothers us, but I'm sure some of you want to get on with stuff. And there's one just come in as well. But anyway, 2 last questions. I'll start with David. How soon after lambing do we mob up twins? How do we move the twins and on the rotation? So
literally the tups have gone out for say 20 days. I will normally set stock off the back of the fetal aging number of days for about 25 to maybe 27 days, just so there's a little bit of an overlap for those stragglers. But really, as soon as the last ewes lambed in that field, we'll start putting 2 into 1 and just start moving them around gently. And just as soon as those lambs are a couple of weeks old, we can be up to the mobs of 250 and flicking them around, because at that point we're getting pretty explosive grass growth, and if we're not moving quickly, we're going to be creating surpluses that we can't really manage.
So generally speaking, Hamish, the first 2 weeks worth of lambs, because you mark them to colour, you'll drift those out quite often, won't you? And they become your first group so that they can actually be in those treatment groups.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, like you say, anything from 2 weeks to 3 weeks, they're mobile, they're moving through those fences and onto rotation, really, without mismothering. I think we have found over the years that if we go much more than 200 ewes, twin bearing, twin rearing lambs, you can get a few more problems. So that seems to be the magic sort of level we work at generally. And then Cormac, just to finish off, and I'm afraid we won't be able to take any more now after this. I've got Clive just putting a comment. I'll come to that at the end. That's a comment more than a question, Clive, but thank you for mentioning that to us. That in terms of when do we mark lambs tail dock, normally you start docking and we take DNA samples for parentage at the same time, normally when they're about 4 weeks old, Hamish.
Yeah, that's right. We just do a sort of New Zealand style marking with a chute, and but there's quite a lot of data capture at that point. As Dewi said, there's the tissue samples, the lambs get tagged, they get their first vaccine, a scratch, we measure tail length, we do a full tail length and a bare skin tail length as well, as part of sort of some of the deeper data capture. So yeah, normally by 4 weeks, you've got to remember at 4 weeks, some of the youngest lambs are on the weak side. So it's probably on that 4 to 5 week. A week makes a big difference for a young lamb.
Yeah. And normally you're doing them in their sort of colour groups, Hamish, aren't you? So that we mark, how often do you change colour on spraying the lambs? Every 5-6 days?
Yeah, it's about that, yeah. And obviously that gives us one of the things we capture at tailing, which is the week that the lamb was born in. And obviously that's important because we don't have a specific date of birth for that lamb. And that gives us the midpoint of that week for the start of their growth EBVs. So it's from that point their daily live weight gains are calculated for the EBVs.
And that's because we don't tag at birth. We just do a normal commercial lambing. Hamish will only assist a small number of ewes that need it. And it's at that 4 weeks of age where tags are put in the lambs and all those other extra data capture points and DNA is taken. And we use that DNA then to work out who mum and dad are. And we also painfully DNA dead lambs, which grieves me no end. But it does mean that we'll actually also trace back who mum is of a dead lamb, which gives us much more power in selecting live lambs or sheep that can produce live lambs. So as you can see, this isn't a farm, although it's been run very commercially, there's a lot of complexity in Southfield in terms of the data capture that's overlaid over the farm. So Hamish and the team have to juggle quite a lot of stuff at different times, really. So thank you, Clive, for the comment. Clive saying Aberdeenshire's extreme at the moment, but the Highlander Trust North Country tributes that he has are doing fine. So that's very good to hear. And thank you, Anne, for the kind words of the webinar. Thank you both, Rhidian and Hamish. Yeah, as always, insightful. I think everybody will understand that neither of the speakers think that they have it sorted. It's a learning process and it's a continual process, but a huge amount of knowledge gathered along the way. So we will share for you Rhidian's contact details with the recording when you get it tomorrow. And he is an oracle, somebody that can help you, even with those feed rations, as we were talking before, or anything else up there, really, through the north of England. Well, anywhere, really. Rhidian's happy to come back to Wales as well, aren't you, Rhidian? So.
Oh, yeah, anywhere.
Yeah, and we have always welcoming people into Southfield, Hamish, aren't we? So if there's any groups that want to visit, we're more than happy to host, and you can actually see all of this stuff in action, really. So thank you both. Thank you all for joining us. 2 weeks from tonight, we'll be doing another one. That's going to be involving two of our breeding partners. Neil Perkins, who's been with us from the beginning nearly, and Jamie Charlton and Louise, who have just joined us this year. So different perspectives of breeding sheep with Innovis, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as we say, with it all. So, and on that, we wish you a good evening and thank you. You will get the recording tomorrow, and thank you for sticking with us. Good night.
Yep.